All right, guys, we're going to start in a bit. For those that did not do the training planning seminar, how does this work? Basically, I am going to run you guys through the actual seminar like we have done at UnScared in the past, in a slightly different variation. I have Cecily as an assistant here. If you guys have any questions whatsoever related to the topics we discussed, make sure you put your question in the chat box at the bottom, or that one if it's mirrored. There's a chat box to the side. Put your questions in there. After every subject we cover, I'm going to ask Cecily, like, hey, do we get any questions in between? And we're going to take a moment to actually go through all the questions we got, or at least as many as possible. So assume that it's going to take roughly 90 minutes up to 2 hours for the whole seminar in general. There's going to be Q&A at the end. So if there's anything you guys want to ask, or just some subjects you want to see come by, you could always put them in the chat box. And please mute yourself, everyone, before I mute everyone.
Xbox Game Bar?
Yeah.
Let's see. Can I mute everyone? There's an automatic. No. Okay. So everyone, please mute yourself so we won't get any. All right. So what we're starting with is the first session out of 3. I'm going to take you through a short overview. There are 3 sessions for the nutrition course. The first one, biochemistry and other basics. What are we talking about? Is basically about what do proteins do in the body. We're going to talk a little bit about digestion, stuff like that. So mostly what we're going to do is we're going through like the physical part, the theory, and so on. So here are a few examples of things we're going to talk about. There is no assignment in this case for you guys, although it would be good for you guys to maybe after the session, if you have a private coach, ask them to help you out with the contents if you want to apply something to your specific situation. However, after session 1, next Monday we'll have session 2, which is about goal setting and planning, and we're mostly going to talk about health and performance that session. And the third one, lifestyle versus dieting, we're talking more about the practical aspects. So we're going to talk about different diets, whether you should be dieting at all. We're going to talk about changing habits, about adjusting your lifestyle, and so on, and all the obstacles you may find when you're actually trying to incorporate those things. So what we're starting with is with macronutrients. What we're going to do is we're going to go through a list of things that are in your food that you put in your body, of which it is somewhat useful to know what they actually are. So this is fairly basic stuff, but bear with me. We will go more in depth throughout the seminar, and especially if you want to follow the second and third seminars. You don't have to follow them all, but if you follow the first one, the second and third one will probably be easier to digest. No pun intended. All right, we're going to start with calories. What are they? So you may have noticed if you've read into nutrition that you have a lot of people saying like you need to count your calories, you need to eat more or fewer calories. On the other hand, you will also have people saying like, yeah, calorie counting doesn't work, or you should not count calories because it's obsessive and so on. Before we can even go into that subject, the first thing we need to do is to look at what are calories. That's something you can find in any physics book, or even if you just Google it. A calorie is a measure of energy. It is the amount of energy you use to heat water by 1 degree at a specific air pressure and so on. There's some complicated physics stuff regarding that. But what's important for you guys to know is that a calorie is a way to measure energy. Just like you measure your height in centimeters or in inches. Just like you measure a distance between 2 places in kilometers or in miles. It is a measure of energy, nothing more, nothing less. Why is that so important? Because energy does not disappear into nothing, and energy does not appear out of nothing. So anything you put in your mouth, all the energy you take in through food, it has to go somewhere. You either use it for moving, or you store it as fat, for example. And in the same way, if you move, if you do sports, the energy has to come from somewhere, which means that if you do not have any energy, you cannot expend it. It's a very simple principle. Calories are just measuring the energy in your food that you take in. And we're going to talk about a bit about carbohydrates. Includes all sugars, starches, and fibers. So carbohydrates can include all sugars, that's literally table sugar, but other types of sugar, like the small amounts of sugar we find in milk, also go under sugars. When we talk about starches, we talk about potatoes, we talk about wheat or rye, we talk about rice, corn, all that stuff. And then we have fibers. Fibers are a subset of carbohydrates. You don't have to go super in detail regarding this. What is important for most of you guys to understand is that carbohydrates are, strictly speaking, not necessary to survive, but they still serve important functions. Mostly as an energy supply, but they also have a lot of effects on all sorts of mechanisms in your body. For example, it helps with building muscle indirectly. You could go without carbohydrates. Low carbohydrate diets, for example, are reasonably popular, actually since 30 years or so, I guess. But for most people, eating carbohydrates is a good idea because carbohydrate-rich products, like, for example, oatmeal, will also give you other stuff like fiber, which is necessary for gut health, which helps with lowering cholesterol levels and so on. There's some health benefits to it. What's important to know for you guys is carbohydrates, important for energy, to some extent useful for health and overall performance and so on, but you can, strictly speaking, go without them. Then we have fats. Now this is an interesting one because basically science as a whole has kind of changed their minds a few times over the last 30 years or so. And the reason being is that studies done on nutrition have gotten better and better over time. So we had what we call progressive insight. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, people thought that fat was mostly a bad thing and fat would actually make you fat. Over time, we learned more and more about how important fat is. All the different types of oils and butters you find, and of course things like fatty meat, they all contain fat. And you need fats to survive. Fats are an energy supply, partially, but what they also do is help you absorb certain vitamins better, and also helps with things like insulation of the connection between neurons, like the cells in the brains and the nerve cells. In between, they need insulation. Fats take care of that. Fats also take care of hormone production. So they serve a lot of functions outside of energy supply. That does not mean you should be eating a lot of fat necessarily. It just means you need certain amounts to be reasonably healthy. There are many different types of fat. For most of you guys probably know the difference between saturated and unsaturated fats. Strictly speaking, the difference has to do with the molecular structure. Not going to go too in depth on that. Again, if that's something you're interested in, you really want to go on that nerd safari, hit up Google and look at the whole molecular structure thing. What is important to know, however, is that if you have saturated fats, and you have 3 different types of unsaturated fats, as we call omega-3, 6, and 9. What's important for you guys to know is that a mix of all those is probably best for your health. There is some discussion on specific ratios, like do you need more of this type of fat or more of that type of fat? So peanut oil, for example, has different types of fat than sunflower oil, which has different types of fat as fish, which has different types of fat from meat, and so on. A mix of all of those is probably best, but the exact amounts, that is not something everyone is clear on. In the second session, we'll go into detail a bit more when it comes to health. We'll go into more concrete examples. For now, keep in mind that if you vary your food, so yes, one day you might eat some avocado, another day you might eat fish, another day you might eat eggs, and so on. You get a varied intake of fats. You've probably got most of the health aspect of fat covered, as long as you don't do anything extreme. Then we have protein. Protein is something you take in that is then separated into what we call amino acids, which is kind of like the building blocks of protein, as it's usually called. And those building blocks are used in your body to repair your tissue. What does that mean? That means it helps you build muscle, but it also means it helps you build your nails, your skin, your hair. Maybe you guys have heard of collagen as a supplement. It is sold to have better quality skin and so on. We'll talk about supplements later, but it is very clear that protein is super important for basically everything in your body. If you go without carbohydrates for 1 month, nothing too interesting happens. Yes, some stuff will happen to your body that will go later on, but you won't die from it. If you don't eat fats for a month, You're probably going to get very sick and unhealthy, but you'll probably survive. If you do not take in any protein for a month, you will probably die. Why is that? Because your body is constantly breaking down itself and building itself up. Consider it like you're constantly replacing the cells in your body, and you need protein for that. Common sources of protein are animal products, so eggs and meat, for example, dairy, and to a lesser extent, legumes. So legumes are all types of beans. For the vegetarians among you, cheese and other dairy are fairly obvious. But for the vegans among you guys, legumes are probably going to be one of the main sources of protein if you have a protein-rich diet. Should you have a protein-rich diet? We'll go into that a little bit more later on. But for a lot of people that I have found, they might have some issues getting enough protein, especially if they do not habitually consume meat and such. You definitely do not need meat to have a high protein intake. It just makes it a bit easier. That's it. There's another one, alcohol. It's also a macronutrient. If you do not have alcohol for a month, I know some of you guys are going to have a lot of issues with that. But strictly speaking, your body does not need alcohol. Strictly speaking, alcohol is a poison to your body. Back in the past, people used to think that moderate alcohol consumption was good for you. Well, no. The thing is, back when the first studies concluded that, the reason that they saw that moderate alcohol consumers were healthier and lived longer than people who did not consume alcohol is that because the people who did not drink alcohol also had ill people who could not drink alcohol because of medication. Ex-alcoholics were also in that same category, and so on. If you take those away, suddenly you will see that non-alcohol drinkers are absolutely not less healthy than moderate alcohol consumers. The benefit of alcohol, which is, to put it very simple, to make your blood flow better throughout the veins. That's a very dumbed down explanation, but that's basically what it does. You get the exact same effect by walking normally for 5 minutes. So no, alcohol is absolutely nothing for your physical health, but for your mental health, if it makes you have more fun, if it helps you relax, so on, that is completely fine. It's not going to kill you to have a moderate alcohol consumption. Just don't kid yourself and think you're doing it for your physical health, because you're not. All right. This is the page on macronutrients. This is just a quick overview on calories, a measure of energy. Carbohydrates, so that's your bread and your rice, and basically your main energy source of the things you eat. Fats, also an energy source, but also important for a lot of health aspects. And protein, which you need, otherwise you will die. But people who do a lot of sports, especially strength training, will need a lot more than other people. And then there is alcohol. Drink it if you enjoy it, but no need to do it for health. So I'm going to give you guys a few seconds, a short moment to, let's see. I'm going to give you guys a short moment to actually put some questions in. So I'm going to give you guys a few seconds and take a look at my girlfriend, ask her if she sees any questions come up.
Nothing so far.
Another awkward few seconds, so you guys have the chance to ask some questions. Someone said I mute myself.
No.
Okay, great. All right, no questions so far. If you guys have any questions in between the actual slides that we go through, or during the slides, wherever, put your questions in chat. We'll get to them as soon as possible. Right.
Okay, will you be going into ketones as a nutrient?
We will go into the subject of ketosis and what ketones are. Not as a nutrient, because strictly speaking, it is not a nutrient. You can, for those that don't know, ketones are basically things your body produces itself, and it can function on ketones when there is a lack of carbohydrates. We will be going into that as a supplement and as the function of the body. The body makes them itself, but not as a nutrient, because they are not a macronutrient or even a micronutrient, in the sense that we take them from our food and we need them to perform or to survive. So yes, we will be going into the subject, just not in that specific context. All right, other people, hit up your questions if you wish. Meanwhile, we're going back into the next step. We are going into the micronutrients, vitamins and minerals. What are micronutrients? Well, the difference between macro and micro kind of gives it away. Macronutrients are the nutrients that are in our food the most. So that is, there is a lot of carbohydrates and fats in our food. And we're talking about several grams, up to several hundred grams of those things. Micronutrients, like vitamins and minerals, there we talk about micrograms or nanograms. That means very, very small amounts of things that we need in our body outside of those macronutrients. What's important to know about vitamins and minerals? Hold on, let me just talk about vitamins and minerals first. What are they? They are basically things in our food in very small amounts that help us function better. So there's a lot of vitamins and minerals, a few dozen, and they all have specific functions. So there's something called chromium, for example. It helps us regulate our blood sugar. We have iron that helps us move oxygen throughout our body, and so on and so forth. We have vitamin B, which helps us with nerve function. You don't have to memorize all those things. And again, that's not something we're going to do in this webinar, because you can literally Google list of vitamins and you can see all those in a row. What is important is that we have been taught that vitamins and minerals are good for us. They are, but more is not necessarily better. So a practical example, let's say that we have something like vitamin B. If you have a lack of vitamin B, you sometimes see this with people who are vegan and have a very bad diet. So they just stop eating animal products, but they do not actually think about their food otherwise. They risk having a B12 shortage. So what happens is they can have all sorts of effects like nerve issues in the legs and so on. However, what do some people do? They take a B12 supplement. Certainly possible if you have a shortage of vitamin B in your food. Now, the issue is if you have too much of this, and we have seen this in some cases with people taking vitamin B complex, that's like a different B vitamins, that they would have an overdose of vitamin B6, because vitamin B6 is often very highly dosed. And if you are the person who takes extra vitamins because you think more is better, we have seen people get nerve damage from taking too much vitamin B6. Normally, if you have a reasonable diet, you will probably not have a lack of any vitamins and minerals in general. And I would not recommend overdosing it. We have also seen it currently with the coronavirus crisis. You now have health gurus and personal trainers and such who recommend extreme amounts of vitamin C, because vitamin C is something that's necessary for our immune system. If you do not have enough vitamin C in your body, you are more susceptible to disease. But once you have enough vitamin C, that's about it. It's not that taking extra vitamin C is going to make you that much healthier. There was even there was an article that suggested that maybe having too much vitamin C might have a negative effect and might make you more susceptible to the coronavirus. That is still under research. We don't really know if that's the case, but it does add to the point of more is not necessarily better. There are even some people who go to extremes that they will say that taking extreme amounts of certain vitamins and minerals can even do things like cure ADHD and such. A lot of those things are still under research, but for now it is important to realize that more is not necessarily better and can actually be damaging. So keep that in mind if you're looking at supplements in the category of vitamins and minerals. Specific situations may warrant supplementation. So I have two examples here: folic acid, which is super common for pregnant women or even women trying to get pregnant. And again, that's one of the subjects you can just Google about the function of folic acid for more chance of success in pregnancy in general. Vitamin B12 was the thing I mentioned earlier. So people who are either vegan and do not get additional B12 in their diet, or people who have, not exactly sure what the name of it is. A friend of mine has it, where he has trouble absorbing vitamin B12. So he needs to get an injection with vitamin B12 once every 6 weeks, I think, because his body just does not absorb it properly. In those specific situations, you really need supplementation. That is very different from being like, oh yeah, I heard that vitamin D is good for you, so I'm just gonna supplement it and it should be fine. Well, maybe not. Supplementation when not deficient may have some benefits. So there's a few examples here. So magnesium, even if you're not deficient, taking magnesium before going to sleep may improve sleep quality. Again, this is one of those things that differ per person, and science is not very conclusive about it, but it's something you could experiment with, because a moderate dose of magnesium before going to sleep does not really do anything bad for you, but it may help you improve sleep quality. So that is certainly an option. Then we see zinc. If people have low levels but are not necessarily deficient, adding zinc to your diet or to your supplements may help you increase testosterone levels, for example. There are other effects. Supposedly, it even makes orgasms more intense if you go for super high amounts of zinc. And there's a bunch of other things attributed to high zinc intakes. Again, some of them are not super science-backed, some more than others. But again, it doesn't have to have a negative impact if it is moderate consumption. So sometimes experimentation with it is fine. But again, it is not always a good idea. Keep that in mind. Always look at it in a specific context. We'll get back to zinc in a bit because that's a great example. Salt and potassium for athletes, for example, if you're not deficient, a mix of salt, potassium, and sugar in a specific combination in water can actually help you rehydrate better, which might be super important if you do, I don't know, marathons on hot summer days, or when you have, let's say you have a CrossFit competition, 3 workouts in one day, it's super hot, you want to rehydrate in between workouts. Salt and potassium can be a great supplement to that. And then it may cause problems. I already mentioned vitamin B6. So if you have a vitamin B complex, which is like 6 and 12 and others combined, yeah, it might help you with your deficiency in B12, but overdosing B6 can actually be counterproductive. So again, more is not necessarily better. Zinc is another nice example. Maybe what I said before about, oh yeah, testosterone level is higher, which means more muscle building, more intense orgasms. Awesome, I'm going to use a lot of zinc. Zinc and copper have the same pathway in the body to be absorbed. So zinc and copper are both minerals that you need, but if you take too much zinc, that means that copper is not going to be absorbed properly and you can get a copper deficiency. So long story short, taking a lot of zinc can get you a copper deficiency. Again, because vitamin and mineral supplements are super popular, I think in the US alone, it's like $1 billion industry from supplements, with a lot of that going to vitamins and minerals. Please consider whether you actually need it or whether it is actually going to be useful. In the third session, we talk about supplements. If we have a lot of time today, I'm going to try and get it to today's session, so we have more time for other stuff in the third session. In general, vitamins and minerals, yes, super important. We need them, but more is not better. Keep that in mind and place everything in proper context. Any questions regarding the micronutrients? Oh, look, it's ketones.
We have one so far.
Yeah.
What or how much is enough vitamin C?
That is something I would just Google. I don't know by heart what the actual numbers are. I would just Google that, what the minimum dose is for vitamin C. There is not really a maximum dose for vitamin C, aside from the corona thing I mentioned earlier. There's not really a maximum, because if you take a lot of vitamin C, most of it you just pee it out. There are some situations where people have had some GI distress, so pain in the bowels and the stomach from high vitamin C intake, but then we're talking about several grams. It's like the extreme intakes that some health gurus promote. But the actual minimum intake is actually not that high. If I recall correctly, eating 1 orange is already like twice the amount of vitamin C you need in a day.
I just checked this. The voedingscentrum says that for men and women both, it's 75 milligrams a day if you're an adult.
Yeah, so 75 milligrams a day is not a lot. And even if you're like, well, I'm skeptical of what the voedingscentrum says, you could look up some other countries or the World Health Organization. Sometimes you will see that they have slightly different recommendations than our Dutch voedingscentrum. That has to do with a lot of factors, mostly using different studies as guidelines and so on. But again, vitamin C recommendations are, as a minimum, are actually pretty low. So I wouldn't worry too much about that unless you have specific issues with low vitamin levels. But if that is the case, you might want to get that checked out, because that often has an underlying issue.
Second question was, is too much vitamin C not bad for your kidneys? Well,
not that I know of. It's quite possible. I've never ever heard of high doses of vitamin C being bad for your kidneys. Some things are an issue for your kidney in the sense that it takes more effort for your kidneys to expel it from your body. So things like creatine, for example, and high protein intakes. However, the kidneys usually have an overfunction, if you can call it that. The kidneys function for way more than you actually need. That means that a healthy person and his kidneys can actually take way more abuse than a lot of the other organs. So that's the reason why you can actually take one kidney away and you're probably still going to be fine. However, if you have issues with your kidneys, then some things that are fine for healthy people might be an issue. So high protein intake, for example, might be a very big issue if you already have kidney issues. If you do not have kidney issues, then it is not a problem. So I'm not sure where that came from, the vitamin C, an issue for the kidneys, but you might want to have a look at whether that came from people with pathology, so like disease or anything. Because yes, in that context, I can certainly imagine that it would be an issue, but in healthy people, as far as I know, it's not an issue. But certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never heard of it.
Okay, next up was, how do you feel about taking a daily multivitamin?
That depends. I mean, if you're getting in enough vitamins and minerals in a day, there's no reason to do it. There are suggestions that it might have a negative effect depending on the constitution of the actual vitamin supplements. We see that people who habitually take vitamin and mineral supplements often die earlier and are unhealthier than those that do not. However, that is probably not because of the vitamin and mineral supplements, but maybe people who already are prone to illness take vitamin and mineral supplements more often. So we're not exactly sure how that works. If it is reasonably dosed and the quality is good, I don't really see anything bad about it, except that maybe you're wasting your money. That's possible. But if you feel like, yeah, well, I don't have like a super healthy diet, I might have a shortage of anything, you could certainly do it. But honestly, if you're worried about having a shortage of something, go hit up the doctor. And depending on your doctor, at least in the Netherlands, that's the case. If you have a very specific reason for some blood work, so you have some blood drawn and they take a look at some minerals and all that sort of stuff. If you have a specific reason, like a lethargy, overall tiredness, weakness, being ill often, it will be free, or at least it will be part of your health insurance. If it is not, if you're doing it purely for fun, you'll probably have to pay for it yourself, which is like a base price of 20, 30 euros, and then additional money for every single thing you want to have tested. But if your doctor is willing to cooperate, which I have done in the past because I have diabetes in the family. So at some point I went to the doctor for blood work and I said, like, hey, I have diabetes in the family. I don't have any issues right now. I'd like to have the basic stuff checked. So there's a bunch of stuff, HbA1c, that's something they measure to see if you have diabetes. The common stuff like iron and ferritin, which is especially important for women who have iron shortages more often, and for vegetarians who are also more prone to iron shortages. You can have all the basic stuff checked, like the most common things that you might lack, and then you can actually work with that. Because maybe you're going to find out, hey, everything is fine, and you're just wasting your money. Or maybe you're going to find out, oh no, I have low iron levels, I need something for that. Or I have low vitamin D levels. I could take a supplement, but vitamin D levels could also be a symptom of an underlying issue. So you might want to talk to your doctor about that. Again, if you have no data, if you don't know what your blood work is like, it's like, I don't know what you call it in English, schieten met hagel.
Yeah.
You're basically doing random stuff, and random stuff gets you random results, just like in training. So I'm not against it. I just recommend that if you're generally interested in your own health, do it properly instead of half-assing it with random supplements. More.
I think you pretty much already answered this, but just to be sure, how do I know if I should use vitamin supplements? How do I judge if I need them or not, given that I'm a healthy person in general?
Yeah, have your blood work done. There are certain things that that you might be more at risk of. So if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, there are certain things you're more at risk of. Women in general are more at risk for iron deficiency and so on. So you might want to have those things checked. That's probably the best way to go about it. But if you do not have any specific of those things, you're not predisposed to certain diseases because of your family, like I have diabetes in the family, If you have none of those things, honestly, you could have it checked out, but that's the best way to do it. You could take it preemptively, but like I said, it might just be a waste of money. But it's probably not going to do anything really bad to you as long as you reasonably dose it. So don't take extra doses just because more is better. Small dose, reasonably dosed of everything. Yeah, you could do it. More.
So Holland Berry, but I also know other people do this too, sells multivitamins especially for men and women separately.
Yeah.
Do men and women need different vitamins and minerals?
Yes and no. The doses are sometimes higher for men because men are on average heavier, but of course that is kind of silly because there are way too many exceptions to not take that into account. There are some small differences. So women are more prone, like I said, to shortage of iron deficiency. So you will see that women vitamin supplements and mineral supplements usually have more iron in there. Because vitamin C helps with iron absorption, it is quite possible that there is more vitamin C in there. We also see with women that they generally have weaker bones. So you might find more vitamin D and calcium and magnesium in there. So yes, there are some differences, but honestly, most of it is marketing. So yeah, those differences are fairly small. If you're already taking a vitamin and mineral supplement on top of decent nutrition, you don't have to have it perfect, just decent nutrition. You're already probably covering all your bases more than you need to. One caveat, by the way, some research suggests that certain vitamins and minerals do not have the same effect in a supplement as they would have from nutrition. We don't know exactly why that is. It might have to do with certain combinations of vitamins and minerals. It might also have something to do with bioactive compounds. We estimate that there's a few dozen thousands. I think the estimate was around 36,000 or something. 36,000 compounds in our food that we do not yet know if they exist and whether they have a specific function and how they work. One example is resveratrol. Resveratrol is a bioactive compound that got some press coverage around 2008 or something. It is part of grapes and also part of wine. And resveratrol supposedly protects the heart from heart disease to some extent. So then people said, oh, you need to eat more grapes or drink more wine. And that was a whole big thing back then. So there's a lot more of those bioactive compounds, and they may sort of enable the vitamins to be absorbed in our body, or maybe they have some sort of synergetic effect. We don't really know that. So that's another reason why maybe vitamin and mineral supplements were not always going to be super helpful. Plus, on top of that, not every type of a certain mineral is going to be super useful. So when you have chromium, let me think, picolinate and chromium. There's 3 or 4 different versions. They're all basically like different molecularly structured variations of that same mineral, and not all of them are properly absorbed into the body. So if you're serious about using magnesium, for example, you have to look at which variation is magnesium citrate or magnesium picolinate or the other one. Because one of them, off the top of my head, I think it was citrate, which is the only one that is properly absorbed. If you really want to know more about that, email me later on and I can look it up for you. More questions?
Yeah, I think this is the last one from now. Is there a quality difference between supplements from, let's say, Kruidvat or from a more expensive brand like a vitamin store?
Yes, there is a quality difference. It is not necessarily related to how expensive it is. But like I said, there are different variations of each mineral, and not all of them are absorbed very well. So that is one part of the equation when it comes to quality. Then there's the amounts. If, for example, you need at least 15 milligrams of zinc every single day, and the dosage is like 0.04 milligrams of zinc, obviously that's not going to cut it. So that's also part of quality. And then there is some concern over contaminated supplements, or supplements that do not actually have in them what they say they have. Although in the Netherlands, it is somewhat tightly controlled. It's not as bad as in the US, where at some point they did a test where 25% of all supplements were contaminated with doping-like substances. It's not that bad in the Netherlands because we are way more strict about controlling it. But it's still a concern, I guess. So yes, there is different quality. There are some brands that I have slightly more faith in than others. Powersupplements.nl is one I really like for a variety of reasons. Flindal is one I like for a variety of reasons. We'll go more into supplements later on, But yeah, there's definitely a difference. And what I usually look for is if a supplement company or a store sells a lot of bullshit supplements, excuse my French, then I'm already a bit skeptical about whether they have proper quality or not. Because if you sell stuff that simply doesn't work or might even work counterproductively, then I'm also going to be slightly skeptical on the other stuff that does work, whether it's proper quality or not. But that's more of a personal thing. Yes, there's a difference in quality in a variety of ways.
Okay, last one. I think this is something you're going to cover later. What is your opinion on creatine? Is it worth using for muscle growth and fatigue, or is it a waste of a supplement?
I'm going to go into that later on, but to answer your question shortly, yes, you need it, do it, it's good for you. Sorry, that was the short version. I'll go into that later on, don't worry. There is more. Aside from the micronutrients, there's a few things in your food that I would like to cover a bit more in detail. Was there an extra question?
Nope, that's it.
Good. So one of them is ketones. When your body lacks energy, specifically carbohydrates, which it normally uses to function in a lot of ways, the muscles run on it, the brains work on it mostly. If there is a shortage, your body will be like, oh no, there is no energy for my brains. So what does it do? It starts producing ketones, which it produces from fatty acids. So the fat in your body that you eat is going to be turned into ketones, and ketones can be used as brain fuel, basically. This has a few weird effects because some people get a big brain fog, as it's called, so they feel very sleepy and tired and have trouble focusing. And a bunch of people will usually go through that within a few days and be completely fine. And a lot of people will also never ever get out of that so-called keto fog. Now, for the people who actually get through it, the body adapts and they actually feel very good on it. There's actually people who say like, hey, ever since I went low carb or keto, as they call it, I'm actually more focused, I feel better, and so on. Some people actually do very well on it, and it has to do with how the body adapts to it. Other people are just going to feel super shitty. No way around it, and those people are never going to get out of it. They probably should do it unless they have a very, very, very good reason for it. For example, in children with epilepsy, sometimes they use keto diets to sort of control the epileptic attacks. So yeah, that is a highly specific situation. But ketones in and of themselves, it is just a substitute energy source that your body produces by itself. It is a survival mechanism. That's kind of all there is to it in that sense. If you do go in ketosis, as it's called, you will also risk keto breath, which is where your breath will smell like acetic acid, acetone, yeah, acetic acid. It's super weird. When you pee, your pee will smell like acetic acid, kind of like nail remover. It's super weird. So that happens. Do not confuse this with ketoacidosis. I'm not going to go into the details because it makes it super complicated. Again, ask me later if you want to know more about it. Ketoacidosis is what happens with some people who are diabetic when they get too many ketones in their body, and all the ketones in their body cannot be handled properly, and you die. That's kind of what happens. That's what's called ketoacidosis, but healthy people should not have issues with that. That specifically happens with diabetics in specific situations. All right, next one, water. Well, I can basically dumb this down to one sentence. If you're thirsty, you need to drink water. Done. That is for most people completely fine because your body adapts very well to drinking more or less water, up to the point that a lot of people manipulate their water intake so much that at some point they can either lose weight, just water weight, for a competition, for example. In weightlifting, we have weight classes, and you can manipulate your water intake so that your body flushes out some water and you suddenly weigh 2 kilos less. That's very well possible. There are some guidelines for how much water to drink. Most people will say 1.5 to 2 liters of water per day. Some say you need 1 liter of water for every 1,000 calories you eat. They're all great guidelines, but for most people, drinking when you're thirsty or when you're comfortable drinking is a nice guideline. There are exceptions. If you need to rehydrate very badly for heavy, intense workouts when it's super hot, then you might want to drink preemptively. And then maybe you can say like, hey, today I want to drink at least 3 liters of water because otherwise I'm not going to drink enough. We also see this in the winter, and especially with older people. As people get very old, their sense of thirst kind of worsens. So they don't really feel it when their body needs water. Very old people, we're talking about people like 80 years old, especially in conditions where it's cold, where you're less tempted to drink. It can certainly be a good idea to preemptively drink water, but for most people, you don't have to overcomplicate it on a normal day where it's not super hot, you don't have any issues, and so on, right? Anti-nutrients. That's a very interesting one. Anti-nutrients are nutrients in your food that have a negative effect. And a very famous example is what we find in bread, but also in rice and in beans. It's called phytic acid, phytinezuur in Dutch. Phytic acid is something that when it's in your stomach, it will attach itself to certain minerals like iron so that your body cannot absorb the iron anymore. So now you have people saying, there was a book called Wheat Belly, Broodbuik, back in 2011 or something. It's absolutely atrocious. It was very bad science, cherry picking and so on. It was very much like wheat is the devil and wheat is poison and you should never ever eat bread and bread is the reason we're all getting fat and so on. The whole book is a joke aside from that. One of the things they mentioned was the phytic acid in your body. And even the less extreme people who are more sensible say like, well, maybe I should get in less phytic acid or oxalic acid, which we find in spinach and stuff. The thing is, our body is able to neutralize about 90% of all the phytic acid that we ingest already. So most of it isn't even an issue. And that little bit that you get in is also not an issue because, you know, it's only a little bit. So a lot of people are worrying about nothing. But it is true there are anti-nutrients. It is true they may have negative effects in your body. There was something in soy as well, like soybeans and tofu. I can't remember the exact name. It was something complicated, which would have a negative effect on protein muscle synthesis. So, muscle protein synthesis. So building muscle. Yes, it does exist. Yes, the mechanism does exist, but it is so small that you're not even going to notice it. So there's a lot of fear mongering on this. You'll see the health gurus be like, oh no, this is so bad for you. You should never eat it. You should buy my product instead because it's way better, obviously. But again, it's for most part, it's just a lot of fear mongering. And if you just have a varied diet, you know, that's kind of what grandma taught us. Varied diet already makes sure that you do not get too much of an anti-nutrient and also make sure you get all your nutrients in. So here's a hint for next session when we're talking about health. A varied diet, yes, is probably a very good idea. Sugar alcohols. That's a funny one. A sugar alcohol is a type of carbohydrate. It is often used as a sweetener because it has less calories, less energy than normal sugar. And we see this in protein bars, for example, or basically sweetened variations of candy. Now, this has one big issue. The reason why it has less energy than other carbohydrates is because the body does not digest it well. It goes all the way throughout your body. We're going to talk about digestion later. It goes all the way throughout your body, and it sits all the way at the end of your bowels, and it starts fermenting. When it starts fermenting, it forms gas. And that is literally what you guys think it is. It's going to give you very bad stomach cramps, and it's going to make you very windy for quite a while if you're sensitive to it. It depends. Some people have iron stomachs, can take everything. Well, I could take a lot of stuff with my stomach, but when I had a whole bag of candy with sugar alcohols in it, very bad idea. Never do that. I think I had like extreme stomach cramps for like 2 hours. Well, extreme. I'm a dude, so I'm kind of overreacting, but it did hurt. Are sugar alcohols an issue? Well, everything in moderation. It is certainly not good for your bowels, and it is possibly bad for the bacteria in your gut. But again, if it's a small amount, you're never ever going to notice any difference in terms of health and such. But some people who are sensitive to it might get stomach aches from it. Yeah, if that's the case, just don't do it. Simple. Where do you find that? It's called polyols, polyolen in Dutch. If you see anything with ends with -ol, like polyols, in something like a protein bar, it's probably in there. Nothing to stress out over, but you know, maybe not eat 6 protein bars in one day. Artificial sweeteners, another interesting one because it is super controversial. People were so afraid of aspartame that it is now one of the best researched nutrients, like in nutrition science in general. Because yes, there were some studies that linked aspartame to neurodegenerative disease, to neurological damage, to cancer, and so on. The big issue is that a lot of those studies are not applicable to humans in the way that we consume it. So I'm going to stick with aspartame as an example because it's a well-known one. One of the most famous studies that is often cited was a study done in rats. Now, rats have cancer way easier and faster and earlier than humans do. They injected aspartame into their bodies. We do not inject aspartame. We drink it with our Diet Coke. We don't inject it. They injected it in an amount that is equal to, I think it was 30 or 35 liters of Diet Coke. Well, if you drink 30 liters of Diet Coke in one day, you have other issues you need to address before you start worrying about the aspartame. So again, in small amounts, it is fine. In higher amounts, it may have a negative effect in some way, but then you need extreme amounts. Like I said, we were talking 30, 40 liters of Diet Coke before it is an issue. It is the same with Splenda. Splenda is the brand name for sucralose. Sucralose is also a sweetener. Some studies suggested that it had a negative effect on the gut bacteria. The way it looks now is it does have an effect. It's relatively small, but again, everything in moderation. So are artificial sweeteners good for you? Well, not necessarily. Are they bad for you? Only in high amounts. So just like with a lot of stuff, I know it's a super boring answer, but reality is not as spectacular as some of the headlines in news would have you believe. It's not as terrible and demonized, dangerous as been demonized by a lot of health gurus. On the other hand, it's also not something I want to stimulate with people doing. Unless you're specifically trying to lose weight, then substituting a sweetener for sugar can be fine. There was some concern at some point because we saw that people who ate or drank more sweeteners gained more weight than other people. But you guys know the saying, correlation doesn't equal causation. They didn't know whether the sweeteners caused people to become overweight or that overweight people are more prone to using artificial sweeteners. So the first thing we do in science then is to look at, is there a plausible mechanism? There is not, because of calories. If there are no calories, you literally cannot gain any fat. I mean, you could gain water weight or something, but it's not possible to gain fat if there's no energy coming in. So that was already not possible. That was weird. So then they did other studies, and then they found out that people who substituted sweeteners for sugars actually did lose weight in small amounts. That does not mean that sweeteners are a great way to lose weight. It just means that it all boils down to the behavioral part, like how much of it are you actually taking. That's something we'll go into more in the second and especially the third session. For now, just keep in mind, artificial sweeteners, if you don't feel the need to use it, don't do it. If you feel like it gives you headaches or whatever weird stuff, okay, sure, don't take it. But in small amounts, it should not be an issue. Just don't, drink 30 liters of Diet Coke in a day. All right, I'm probably sure there's going to be angry people among you who are like, oh no, but artificial sweeteners are the devil. So hit me with the questions. No death threats yet?
Not yet. I'm waiting for them.
All right, good. So if you guys think I'm being sponsored by Big Pharma or by the sweetener industry, this is where you can throw in all your angry threats and such.
Also, please try and get us sponsorships from Big Pharma because we could really use the money.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome. We're trying to build a house and build our own weightlifting gym in the backyard. And if any artificial sweetener producer was willing to pay us for saying that artificial sweeteners are safe, yeah, 100% do it.
Okay. I drink about 4 to 5 liters of water a day. I work long days in hot kitchens, so the water is a really refreshing thing. Is there something like drinking too much water, even when I don't feel it's too much?
There is something as drinking too much water, but it doesn't happen very easily. The thing is, normally, if the water goes into your body, the body needs to be absorbed. And that goes through the cell walls, and it has to do with something called osmosis. And there's all these minerals that have a function in there. Again, Google all that sort of stuff if it's interesting. Google electrolytes on Wikipedia, and you'll find more information. If you do not have enough of those electrolytes, which is salt and potassium and magnesium and something else, there's a few of the minerals. Those minerals make sure that water is transferred throughout your body, into cells, out of cells properly. If you have way more water in your body than you have electrolytes, like relatively, then it may become an issue. It starts with something simple as GI distress. So that's like being nauseous and stomach pain, stuff like that. That's usually the first sign. In extreme cases, you can go in sort of a shock and you can actually die from overhydration. But to be able to do that, you need extreme amounts of water and no minerals. So there was, this was like 10, 15 years ago, I think. There was a hazing ritual in ontgroening in Dutch, a hazing ritual in Groningen, I think it was. And there was a student, and he wanted to get into the student association, and I think they made him drink like 15 liters of water or something. That was it. Sorry, there was a different one. They had him drink like 4 liters of water in like 10 minutes, something like that. And the guy had to go to the hospital. I don't know if he survived it, but that was 4 liters of water in 15 minutes without proper minerals and all that. So his body couldn't handle it, so he had to go to the hospital. 4 liters of water in 15 minutes is rather extreme, so that's probably not going to happen to you. I myself have personally drank up to 10, 11 liters of water in a day, but only combined with enough salt and all that sort of stuff. So as long as you eat properly, maybe get some extra salt in if you feel like, hey, it's a super hot day, I'm drinking ridiculous amounts compared to what I usually do. My body is not used to it. Yeah, then you might want to get in some extra minerals, just eat some extra bananas for the potassium and eat some extra bread for the salt, and you're probably good. I've personally never seen anyone with issues regarding too much water intake, because I usually don't coach stupid people.
What is your opinion on stevia versus aspartame?
Well, in terms of taste, I prefer aspartame anyway. When it comes to stevia, it's fine. The thing I hate about stevia is I don't really like the aftertaste if you use it in cooking. What you need to also watch for is a lot of times when you buy stevia, it's only like 5% stevia and the rest is just a filler or a different type of sweetener. A lot of people like stevia over other sweeteners because it is more natural. It is not. The simple reason is that stevia does not grow on the floor or in the ground, wherever on a tree. Stevia comes from a plant. From their plant, they pull out the steviol glycosides, hard word, stevio something, and they actually take that and they have to process it out of there, and then they have to process it into a new product. So there is a lot of processing going on there. So it's not that natural. It's very different from having a plant that you actually put in your food. Aside from that, I don't know of any negative effects from stevia, not even higher doses, but I haven't read any studies on that. So I don't know, but if you prefer using stevia, or if you're just like, hey, I'm not sure about aspartame, feel kind of uncomfortable doing it, yeah, just stick with stevia if you can, manage the taste. Sure.
Okay, and when you mention water, do you mean water only or just general daily liquid intake, e.g. coffee, tea, milk, or soda?
Yeah, well, I was specifically talking about water, but all those things basically fall into the same category. There used to be some concern about coffee, whether it should be part of your water intake or not, because it may, how do you call that?
Diuretic.
Yeah, diuretic. It has a diuretic effect where you actually start peeing more and so on. The effect is relatively minor. And because you're already drinking together with a diuretic effect, the net result is still that you're hydrating yourself. So yeah, coffee and tea and all the other drinks go along with it. Even the food. I mean, if you're just eating bread, there's water in bread as well. Not a lot, but there is some water in there. And basically in anything else. So all those things count towards your daily water intake. So if you're like, well, I want 2 liters of water every day. Yeah, tea, for example, just fits in there. More before you go to digestion.
Nothing so far. Still no sponsorship deals. Okay.
All right, guys, give us that sponsorship deals. If there's any one of you from Big Pharma or anything in there, please hit us up. We're moving on to digestion in the meanwhile. So for digestion, we're just going to do a quick rundown on how everything works. The mouth, that is where everything starts. When you chew your food, you are starting your digestion. There is some minor pre-digestion. There is a little uptake of the things you have, like water and alcohol. So water can be taken up through the mouth. Even alcohol can be taken up into your body through your mouth, only in small amounts. That pre-digestion thing is very interesting because whenever you eat certain things, let us take the example of amylose. Amylose is part of starch. So bread, for example, has amylose in it. And in your saliva, your spit, there is something called amylase. And amylase and amylose work together because amylase helps with digesting the amylose. That means that if you chew properly, you will digest it better, hopefully preventing any GI distress and so on. So it's another reason why chewing your food is so important. So that is where the digestion actually starts, not in the stomach, but actually in the mouth. Then it goes towards the stomach. That's where most of the pre-digestion is done. There is a little uptake of some things. Some medication is also taken in through the stomach. I think some of the painkillers actually absorbed in the stomach even before it gets into the bowels. The major predigestion happens here. So this is, for example, where casein, which is a type of protein that comes from dairy, stays for a long time because it's so hard to digest. So it stays there for quite a while. This is also where fat is mixed up with, what do you call it in English? Bile. And from there, basically in small clumps, the food is going to be put from the stomach through the stomach sphincter into the bowels. Then we have the small intestine. That is where most of everything is being taken in. So the rest of the digestion, and that is where all the nutrients are going through the walls of the intestines, into your bloodstream, into the rest of the body. Then everything that is left is being pushed through into the large intestine. The last 10% or so of your nutrients is either digested there or turned into feces so that you may poop it out. Also, in this part, this is also where the whole fermenting happens that I mentioned. Things that cannot be properly absorbed into the body or properly digested, like those sugar alcohols, they can be actually like caught up in there. They're going to stay there a while until you poop it all out. And that is where the fermenting happens, the gas forming happens, and that's what's going to make you feel bloated, windy, give you stomach pains, and so on. And from there, then it's like everything is pooped out at the end. And that's basically everything there's to it. Why is this important to know? Well, most of this is probably not super relevant for you guys. Some of it might be interesting. For example, the fact that medication is already taken in through your stomach. And for those that are interested in more of the performance aspects, then this is also good to know. We'll go into that next week, next time when we're talking about performance. The simple example is the fact that you can take in some things in your mouth, and that taste also has an effect on performance. It means that taking some sugar water in, like just the 1 or 2 sips, can already help you in a short wad, even though the actual digestion happens mostly in the small intestine of sugars, right? That's something to go in for performance next week if you find that interesting. Questions so far?
Nothing so far.
No poop questions?
Not yet.
All right. Then let us move on. There's a short intermezzo here before we go into the physical aspect. And the reason that I always hammer this is because there is so much confusion on what is true when it comes to nutrition. When it comes to things like, you're following a health guru, or you're following an education institute, you're following some sort of website or a page or whatever, or maybe you've done an education, some sort of course, or a full-blown 4-year bachelor of nutrition. How do you know who is right when everyone is saying something else? Every year we have new diets, and every time we're bombarded with this is bad for you and that is bad for you. And sometimes we believe things that are simply not true. We used to think that the earth was the center of the universe. Why do we believe things that are not true? It's very hard for us to change our minds. If you tell me now that squatting is bad for your knees and hips, I will most likely do whatever I can to disprove you. But if you were to tell me that squats are very good for sports performance and they will strengthen you, I will say, yes, 100%, you're right. So I have a certain bias, and we all have that. I'm sure every one of you guys came in here believing certain things about food. Maybe you thought that artificial sweeteners are bad, and maybe you still believe that. Or maybe you feel that you need extreme amounts of protein to be able to build muscle. Or I don't know. You probably have some sort of conviction there. And some of them may be true and some are not. So why do we believe things that are not true? Well, there's a few factors in that. Confirmation bias. We tend to believe things that we already think we know. So if as a kid you were taught that candy is bad for you, then you will be more likely to believe it when someone confirms it than when someone gives you the opposite or maybe a nuanced answer, because people do not do well on balanced statements. They do well on the extremes. Things are good or bad. And if there's a gray area, it's complicated. We have to think about it. So confirmation bias makes information processing easier. basically related to that, we're very sensitive to hypes, things that are not nuanced. We're sensitive to sensation or commotion because it's easier to process, right? It's very easy to memorize. Chocolate is a superfood. It is harder to memorize. Well, chocolate has some substances in it that are healthy for you, like antioxidants, because chocolate has a high ORAC value. But in large amounts, you would also have excessive amounts of sugar and fat, so you would have to take in moderation. It's complicated. I'll probably use one or two terms that you've never heard before, like ORAC value and stuff like that. You don't even have to know those terms. What's important to realize is that maybe the things you think were wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in 10 years from now, we will have better studies and we will find that, oh yeah, aspartame is bad for us after all. We don't know. So far, everything seems fine, but maybe we'll think differently in 10 years from now. We used to think saturated fats were very bad for us. At some point, it became more nuanced. We said, well, okay, it's not that bad, but you might want to be careful with it. Now we have people taking it into extremes saying, oh, you see, saturated fat is not bad. You need to eat a lot of saturated fat. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, because saturated fats have their function in the body. They help with things like testosterone production, but high amounts may still have a negative effect on heart health. So again, there's a gray area in between. That's the boring area, but that's where we're probably going to find the truth at some point. We also observe without understanding the mechanism behind something. And this is very important to realize. Let us say that I want to lose weight. I now eat 5 apples per day and I start losing weight. Did those 5 apples cause me to lose weight? Well, probably not. Possibly because the apples, I started eating more apples. I started eating less candy and other stuff, which means I ate less calories, because apples have less calories than large amounts of junk food. And that's why I started losing weight. But because people do not understand all the mechanisms behind it, psychological, neurological, and physiological, it is very easy to come to conclusions that are not right. Maybe you count your calories and you're like, well, but I only eat 800 calories a day and not losing weight. Okay, well, that's going to be very weird, because we know from physiology and from physics that it is physically impossible. But you still believe it. Why? Because you do not know the mechanisms behind it, because maybe you made certain mistakes in calculating your calories, for example. Or maybe you're not as strict as you thought you were, and there's these psychological tricks that your mind plays on you. It's something we'll go into in the last session as well. That is super important. Why? Because if you understand the mechanisms, then you have options. If I tell you guys that eating 5 apples a day will make you lose weight, you have to eat 5 apples, even if you hate eating apples. But if you understand that it's about the calories, then it gives you options. Oh, I could eat 5 apples. I could also just, find a different way to eat less junk food. It gives you options, gives you more autonomy, makes it more sustainable, because anyone can follow a diet for a certain amount of time. Anyone can book results in a short time frame, but sticking to it, that's very hard. We have thousands of diets, literally, and they all have testimonials and they all have people with great results. But how many of them actually keep their results in the long run? That's a very, very, very small group. We're talking about a few percent of all those people, right? So here's a few things to be critical on the things you believe. Don't drive yourself crazy with it. Just keep it in mind when you're trying to learn new things. And if you're not sure if someone's bullshitting you or not, just ask them to explain it. If they cannot explain it, then maybe they don't understand it as well as they think. It doesn't make them wrong. It just means that maybe you should, ask someone who actually knows how it works. Oh yeah, conspiracy theories. That's funny. A lot of people don't believe things because Big Pharma is paying for the studies and such. Yes, Big Pharma does pay for studies, and big companies like Unilever and stuff, yes, they do pay for studies, because if they don't, we would not have a lot of money for studies. We would not have studies at all. So saying that something is not true because it was paid for by a big company is kind of like the same saying that you are wrong because you're ugly. You're basically just attacking the person instead of the actual contents. If you want to know if something is true or not, you should look at the study. And then, yes, absolutely, there are certainly very biased studies paid for by big companies. Example are BCAAs. BCAAs are a supplement that are used in sports a lot. If you take a look at all the studies, you will notice that some studies say it builds more muscle and some say it does not. A lot of the studies that say it builds muscle are actually paid for by people who actually make these supplements. And the studies that do not say that it helps, they are often more independent funders. So what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that those other studies are wrong, but we should be very skeptical and look at whether the studies were done properly, whether the studies were not too biased, and so on. So again, coming up with the conspiracy theories, it doesn't really help anyone. It's good to be skeptical, but we know that people who are very much into conspiracy theories, they actually did some research on that. The biggest personality traits in those people were the need to be unique and the need to control and understand things. Supposedly these people had a lot of issues with accepting that they could not control and understand a lot of things in the world. So that is where a lot of conspiracy theories come from. Things like the flat earth theory, for example. I delved into that in the past. That's a rabbit hole you don't want to go down, trust me. But yeah, that's one example. And a lot of other stuff as well. Not to say that they're all wrong. I mean, there's plenty of examples of scientists who just made up numbers in their studies and who just kind of like committed fraud in the whole thing. They're certainly there. That's why we have scientists who need to control each other. Instead of just putting out a study, no, you need a whole group of scientists who will take a look at your study and say, hey, this is wrong, that is not okay, and that is hopefully how we'll get closer to the truth. Right, any questions on this?
Nothing so far.
All right, I know this might seem slightly off topic from the nutrition thing, but this becomes especially important if you guys want to learn more outside of these webinars and so on.
Okay, so I have one.
Yeah.
I read in a study that if you were once overweight, you can lose weight, but it's hard to become very skinny.
Yeah.
Because your fat cells won't disappear, but only shrink. Any thoughts on that?
The mechanism is true. Fat cells shrink. They kind of like empty themselves, consider it like a balloon, and the balloon is empty, but then there's still the balloon. So that mechanism is certainly true. I think it takes an empty fat cell around 10 years before it destroys itself. It's something I read somewhere. I don't know. I read it in a book that was not very science-backed, so not sure how accurate that is. But the mechanism I know is true. The thing is, it does not actually say anything, because then you have empty fat cells. Okay, great. What about it? It doesn't really mean anything. The reason that you do not get skinny is at some point you stop losing weight because you do not have a shortage of calories anymore. You can certainly go from obese to super skinny. It doesn't happen usually. Physically, it is possible. Psychologically, neurologically, it's a bit more complicated. In the next session, we're going to talk about weight loss as well, and then we're going to talk about why it is so hard for people to keep off the weight. Losing weight is not super hard for a lot of people. A lot of people can do it. Keeping the weight off is incredibly hard. That's something we'll go into the next session, but it has more to do with the neurology and psychology than the physiology, even though all three are intertwined and they all three have their rules. More?
No, I don't think so.
All right. So make sure you guys distinguish that there is a mechanism, and is the mechanism relevant? Because you were 100% correct, the mechanism certainly is there. Just like with the anti-nutrients, they are there, but is it relevant? That's probably the thing people need to ask themselves more. All right. Normally there would be an assignment, exploring your own bias. We're not going to do that now. That will be something we normally do in the course. And we talk a bit about convictions you have regarding nutrition. And we're going to ask each other skeptical questions like, why do you believe this? So maybe I believe that, I don't know, anti-nutrients are not bad for you. They're fine. And then someone's going to ask me, well, why do you believe that? Who told you this? Who taught you this? Where did you read this? Okay, how reliable is that source? And if you do that a few times with yourself, like just take any conviction in your head, think about, I believe this is healthy or this is unhealthy. Ask yourself, who taught you this? And is this person a reliable source, right? Maybe your mother taught you that vegetables are healthy. Is your mother a nutrition expert? No, well, that doesn't make her wrong, obviously. It is just kind of meant as a wake-up call, so you realize that not everyone is an expert and you should not believe everything you hear, right? But it doesn't mean that the conviction is wrong, obviously. Yeah, so the examples, product X is unhealthy, a certain institution is trying to keep us unhealthy by feeding us junk food. There's a lot of stuff you can do here, obviously. We're going to talk a bit about daily caloric expenditure. That is basically how many calories do you burn in one day. We already discussed earlier What is a calorie? That is just a measure of energy, nothing more, nothing less. Simple. You burn a certain amount every day and you take a certain amount in every day. And the difference is going to mean whether you lose or gain weight. Keep in mind, not everything what you eat is actually digested 100%. Simple example, if you have a sort of a stomach flu, virus, whatever, and you're going to have diarrhea, then you're not digesting everything properly. That is certainly a possibility. Also, nuts, for example, nuts usually have around 600 something calories per 100 grams. That's a lot of calories. But recent studies show that not everything is properly digested. So it's possible that only 400 calories or so, that means only 2/3 of it, are actually digested in the body. For most people, those are details, so don't worry about it too much. Just take a look at the next slide. What do you burn in a day? You start with your resting metabolic rate or basal metabolic rate. That is how much you burn when you're not doing anything. These two terms are not the exact same. If you want to know the details, Google it. For most people, this is not super important. It's more about understanding the principle here. If you want to know the exact differences, about one is where you're actually lying on your back, and one is taking into account actually, being awake and all that. Google that stuff. What's important to know here, there is a certain basic number of calories you burn, dependent on your height, your gender, genetics. So if you're very tall, you have more skin surface, which means there is more heat that goes away from your body, which means you burn more calories. There's some genetics in there. Some people simply burn more. They have a higher average body temperature. Your gender plays a role. Women generally burn less. Then there is your build. Muscle mass burns more calories than fat mass, even though the difference is not as big as a lot of people used to think. We found out somewhat recently that it's not that much, but it's still a difference. Then we have physical activity, sports. Well, let's say you do an hour of strength class at UnScared, 280 calories. You do an intense hour of CrossFit at UnScared, 395 calories. If you were a Tour de France cyclist, 1,000 calories in an hour. If you're going for a brisk walk, 100 calories per hour. Could be anything, but this goes on top of your basic metabolic rate. And then the next one is very important. It is non-exercise physical activity, like riding the bike to work, but also small things. If you are behind your laptop right now, take a look at what you're doing. Are you wiggling your knees? Are you playing with a pen? All those small things require energy. We're talking about really small amounts, but imagine that you have 1,000 of those things every day. In some of the extreme cases, with people who have the same body composition, they measured that the difference in NEPA for some people was between 300 and 900 calories. That's a lot. Just to give you an idea, most people that we find at UnScared probably burn 2,000 to 3,000 calories in a day. But the NEPA can have up to 900 calories difference for a lot of people. That means almost half or almost 1/3 for a lot of people. Why is this so important? Your non-exercise physical activity can fluctuate immensely. If you guys are cooped up at home because of the coronavirus right now, well, normally you would be riding your bike to work, you would be walking up the stairs in your office and back down, you would have a break at a different floor and so on, you would ride your bicycle back to your home and then to UnScared and so on. Those non-exercise physical activity things can mean you are now burning a few hundred calories less than you normally do. Also, when we see people who eat less, so that means they are in a shortage of calories, they lose weight, their body tries to save energy, so it subconsciously downregulates NEPA. What does that mean? That means that without you noticing, you will walk more efficiently, you will be more inclined to grab the car instead of the bicycle and so on. You will sit still more instead of wiggling around and walking around. And a lot of this stuff is done subconsciously. So yes, the amount of calories you burn when trying to lose weight goes down, but a lot of that is mostly because of this non-exercise physical activity. Then we have non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is the energy you spend with NEPA. These terms are sometimes used interchangeably. It's not exactly the same. For most people, just think of NEPA, non-exercise physical activity, and the other term is not super important for most of you guys. Let's just stick with this one first. Or any questions about these ones? Because there's a few more things that influence your caloric expenditure. But any questions regarding these first three? Or
Nothing so far.
all right, otherwise we're just going to do the next slide. We're going to work with that instead. There. Next one, the thermic effect of food. That is the energy you actually use to process your food. So let us say that you eat a peanut butter sandwich. It goes into your mouth, you chew on it, you swallow it all, and then you digest it in your stomach and so on. The whole digesting thing also costs energy, and that's what we call the thermic effect of food. Is that a lot? No, that might be for big eaters, it's a few hundred calories maybe. It's not going to be a huge amount, but it's still part of the whole equation. Then we have stimulants, from caffeine to amphetamine. Back in the day, there was speed. Well, I mean, there's still speed, the drug that people use. But back in the day, when it was not very well known, people found out that it gave you more energy. It would raise your metabolism. And if it raises your energy, you can also work out harder. So it became popular among bodybuilders. Until at some point, people were like, yo, dude, this is a hard drug and it's bad for you. So it became illegal and people stopped using it. We saw the same thing with ephedrine. Ephedrine is less intense than speed, but it still has a pretty big effect on your energy levels, your heart rate, and so on. And bodybuilders were like, oh yes, well, it's not as good as speed, but this is also fine. So they started using it as a weight loss supplement. And then we had all these non-bodybuilders abuse it, and they got like heart issues from it. So at some point, the government was like, yo, guys, this is not okay. From now on, this is illegal. And now all that is left is caffeine. So basically, it's like caffeine, next step is ephedrine, and then it's amphetamine. I'm not saying you should take those steps, I'm just saying that in order of magnitude, that is how it influences you. Caffeine does raise your amount of calories you burn, and the effect is just not very big. So some people use caffeine as a supplement. It works, just not a lot. It also, in high doses, it also suppresses your appetite. So we'll go into that later on when it comes to talking about supplements. For now, it's just important that you know that all these things have their influence on your daily caloric expenditure. Questions? No. Awesome. We're going to go into the next one. There. Food as fuel for sports, adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Please do not try to memorize the whole word. ATP is fine. Why is this interesting? I'm just going to run you guys through the whole thing. This is a very black and white way of seeing how it actually works. It's slightly different than what it says here. But you have three energy systems. They supply energy for everything you do in a day. Going to work, thinking, playing sports, and so on. Here you see the energy system. Here you see how fast ATP generates. ATP is the actual thing in your body that helps you use your muscles. That's the easiest way to think of it. ATP is what makes your muscles work. You see how fast it generates. You see how efficient the ATP is generated, and what nutrient is mostly used, and how long the system works. So example, the first one is what we call anaerobic alactic, right? Speed of ATP generation, it doesn't generate ATP a lot. There is basically some ATP is there. The efficiency is then also not very relevant. It doesn't use a specific nutrient. Actually, it uses all your nutrients in your body. But when this energy system works for around 10 seconds, up to 15 or slightly longer, that is when you sprint. So when you do a 10-second sprint, when you do 2 heavy power cleans, stuff like that, you'll be using this energy system. You'll be using ATP, but you can only do that for about 10 seconds. That's it. Then if you keep pushing after 10 seconds, so for 10 to 90 seconds, up to a few minutes, then you go into the next system. It generates ATP very fast. It's not very efficient, and it uses carbohydrates. So to put this into perspective, I assume not every one of you guys knows how this works. If you do something for 10 seconds, you use ATP. Then if you keep doing it for a few minutes, you start using more carbohydrates, sugars. Then if you keep doing it even longer, you can keep doing that for hours. You use mostly fats. It is very efficient with ATP generation. It's just very slow, so the intensity is low. So sprints, a heavy set of 12 back squats, and marathon running. Now, all these systems work together, but some dominate more during certain intensities than others. For some of you guys, it may be a bit hard to follow. If that is the case, don't worry about it. What is important for you guys to know is that the food you eat has an impact on the sports you do. And for most of you guys, from what I've seen in the list, most of you guys are CrossFitters. Carbohydrates are the primary type of fuel that your body uses when it comes to the nutrients that come out of your food, right? Any questions on this so far? Again, you don't have to memorize all this or understand everything. If this is going over your head, just keep in mind carbohydrates are the main type of nutrients from your food that fuel your workouts, followed by fatty acids.
Nothing yet, so give people a few more seconds so they can type furiously if they do have a question.
Yeah, we're already going to move on to the Q&A in general. We've actually been going for longer than I thought, already an hour and 20 minutes. That's awesome. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you my face. I'm sure you guys are waiting for that.
You can already see your face.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought, oh, awesome. Sorry, I will look into the camera more next time. So we're going to go into the actual Q&A. Everything we have talked about before, ask questions about it. For some things, I will say, yeah, show up next week, because then we go more in depth. Like I said before, this was a very theoretical one, so very little practical stuff. That's something for session 2 and 3. But if you understand most of the things we do here, then session 2 and 3 will be way easier to understand. Plus, if at some point through your private coach, you want some nutrition coaching and so on, then in session 2 and 3, after session 2 and 3 especially, it will be way easier to coach you guys because you have a better understanding of how everything works. So if you feel like, oh yeah, but this was not very practical, this is all theory, not very interesting, this is the basis to help understand the practical stuff that comes later. So if it was too boring for you, bear with us. Next time, we're gonna try to translate it into practical stuff. So hit me up with the questions, guys. Or not. Still no sponsors?
Oh, no sponsors.
Ah, it's a question, it's a question.
Yes. How important is it to get calorie intake and macro/micronutrient intake right in one day? Or do you save some for later?
You need to get everything in the exact amount every single day or you will die. Actually, we're all going to die at some point anyway. So that doesn't really matter. How important is it? It depends on what nutrient and to what extent. So a simple example is a lot of vitamins and minerals get stored in your body. So if you do not get certain vitamins and minerals for a day or 2 days or 3 days or maybe even 2 weeks, you're going to be 100% okay. So in that sense, it doesn't really matter. There are other things that do matter more. If you do not eat protein for one day, the effects are not going to be disastrous, but it's certainly going to have an effect on your recovery from sports and muscle mass and so on. So as a rough guideline, I would say when it comes to the calorie intake, that is certainly something you can shift throughout the week a bit. You have people who do that consistently, like they eat more on training days, less on rest days. Sometimes they have cheat days and so on. And a lot of that can be said for it. But as a general rule of thumb, if you, for the macronutrients, if you get them right roughly throughout a day, you'll be fine. If you have, if we're talking about the micronutrients, you're probably good if you don't get them for 1 or 2 or a few days or something. If you have a varied diet overall, you will probably 100% okay. I would stick with a varied diet, get your macronutrients roughly in order, and you have like 90% of your stuff fixed. So I hope that answers your question. If not, ask the same question or another one again. Let's go to the next one.
Is it true that magnesium doesn't combine well with calcium?
Magnesium and calcium combine very well. Even better. You know, we were always taught that calcium is important for your bones. Well, if you take in calcium but no magnesium and vitamin D, calcium doesn't even do a lot for your bone health, for example. You need magnesium, calcium, and vitamin D together, but they need to be in a certain balance. The exact balance, I don't even know by heart, but for most people that's not super important. You just need both. If they are completely out of balance, then it might be a big issue. because it cannot function properly without the other. And bone health is probably the best known example, because everyone said, oh, calcium for your bones. Yes, but that only works if you have enough magnesium or vitamin D, and all those three combined. If you're talking about combining them in one specific supplement, I don't know if it matters that much. I could imagine that if they use the same pathways, just like zinc and copper, taking them together might sort of interfere with the absorption. Not that I know of, but I can imagine there's something like that going on. But as far as I know, I've never heard of that actually being an issue. Not like zinc causing a copper deficiency, which has happened with people. So I'm not sure if you're referring to specific situations, certain pathology, but as far as I know, it should not be an issue.
Okay. What about the use of creatine by the body and supplementation? This has to do with the last point of discussion.
The last point of discussion. Oh, that was the table with the 3 energy systems. I'm going to go into that later on when we talk about supplements in session 3. But for now, basically what creatine does is it, I'll do the elaborate explanation later on. But for now, this is the ATP you have. And every time you tear that ATP apart, you get energy for your muscles. Creatine makes sure that it comes together again, and you can reuse the ATP, and then creatine goes together. That's a very simple way to explain it. It allows you to reuse the ATP that you use in your body. So that has mostly an effect on short, intense bursts of exercise or repeated bursts of exercise. So let's say you have a CrossFit workout with an EMOM with 4 heavy deadlifts, something like that. You're going to use the ATP, and then it's going to replenish. And the more creatine you have in your body, up to a certain extent, the faster you can repeat that same performance. There's some other benefits to it, but related to that point of discussion, I assume you're referring to. That's basically it. Next one.
Okay. Do you have some info, study examples on how alcohol use is poison for athletic performance?
I'm fairly sure I could dig up about 100. It has a lot of negative effects on hormone production, on fat burning, on muscle synthesis, on lung ventilation, and so on. If you want the specific studies, send me an email, jeremy@unscaredcrossfit.com. I can give you a few concrete examples, but it is basically bad for pretty much everything, except for the mental aspect. Next one.
Okay, so there's 2 ones that are pretty related, so I'm just going to catch them into one. If I somehow miss one of your points, guys, then just let me know in the chat, yeah? So, is there a way to measure metabolism to understand better the starting point and define a calorie deficit? And how do I define, how do I find out how many calories my body requires in a day, and depending on activity levels? So that's just me.
If you really want a very specific number, you would have to go in what we call a metabolic chamber. That's where they do a lot of studies, and you put those people in there, and then they basically they measure how much they breathe out, and based on that, so we call the gas exchange, where you like breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, carbon dioxide, and based on that, they measure how much energy you're actually burning. That is a very expensive endeavor. So the easier way is to go online, find a calculator. There's a bunch of them. Some are more accurate than others. They will give you a ballpark number. It is never going to be accurate, especially for the simple reason that your metabolic rate shifts by the day. On a day where you work a little bit harder, you train a little bit harder, you do extra working sets on your squats, all those things are going to have an impact on how many calories you burn in a day. So what I would do is, if you really want to work with the calories, then find one of those calculators. You have the Catch-McArdle formula, the Harris-Benedict formula. There's a bunch of them. Just Google calorie calculator or something like that. If you can't find one, email me at jeremy@unscaredcrossfit.com. I'll copy paste one of them to you. Use them as a guideline. Eat at that specific number, and from there you're going to take a look at your body weight. If it consistently goes up, you're eating more than what you're actually burning. If you consistently go down, then you're eating less. But your weight usually shifts, so don't get on the scale after 1 week and think, oh, I gained weight. Maybe you did not. Maybe you're holding a bit of water for whatever reason. So you have to take a look at the long-term thing. But that is the most reliable way. Measuring, adjusting, measuring. there's absolutely no formula that can give you a better answer, even though it can give you an approximation or ballpark number to start with. More.
Is there a big difference between consuming solid and liquid macros? I like drinking milk for protein. Is it true that when consuming a lot of macros by liquid, your body will not take up all the macros?
If you consume macros by liquid, will your body not take up all the macros? I have never ever heard of that before. I cannot think of a reason why, because liquid is actually easier to digest. So I cannot think of a reason why. However, is there a difference between solid and liquid macros? Yes, because you do not chew your liquid, or I would assume not. You do not chew your liquid, and chewing, because you're using the jaw muscles, has a positive effect on brain function. That's one. It helps you with digesting whatever you're taking in. So if you have, how do you call that, wheat meal, like brinta, if you normally chew on it, it helps with digestion. If you have it in a shake and you just swallow it without even tasting it, then you actually get you might have a negative effect on digestion. So is that going to be a big difference? I don't know. I do not expect so, but it might make a small difference. So does it make a difference? Yes, but probably not in the sense of it having a big impact on the amount of macros you're actually digesting. And as for not taking up all the macros, I don't think it's going to be a huge difference. There is a difference between quality of protein. So the building blocks of protein, amino acids, some protein have more or different amounts. And aside from that, there's something called biological availability. So most plant proteins have less biological availability. So let's say you have 10 grams of plant protein and 10 grams of meat. The protein from meat is probably going to be absorbed better in your body than the protein from plants. That's the reason why I always tell vegans to eat like 20% more protein than the people who do eat meat or dairy. All right, next one.
Yes. I am using soya protein instead of animal. The sticker says it has more protein. Any thoughts or opinions about that?
The statement that it has more protein is kind of weird, because I'm assuming you're referring to protein powder, and protein powder can have 50 grams of protein per 100 grams, or it can have up to 94, 95 grams. So the highest I have ever seen on protein powder is 94, 95 grams, and that was an animal protein. So if it has a lot more, which doesn't really matter because the difference between 94 and 98 is, negligible. But if it says it has more protein, that seems like an empty marketing statement. Soy protein is fine as a supplement, but having more protein, that, I don't know, that doesn't really say anything at all, because you have animal protein shakes with 50%, but also with 90%. So I don't know, empty statement.
Okay. After meeting all the daily requirements for macros, micros, etc., is there a best source of calories to achieve a calorie excess? For example, does it matter if we use carbs or protein?
That is a very interesting question. I really like this question. We are mostly going to delve into that next session, the second one. But for now, is there a best source of calories? Not necessarily. Assuming you have all your daily requirements, I would let preference decide what you're going to take on top of it, assuming you meet all your requirements anyway. In theory, fat would be stored as fat easier. So when you're trying to gain weight, in the sense of muscle, you might want to get the extra calories from carbs or protein instead. But for most people, it's probably not going to matter that much. So I would say do what is sustainable. A lot of people are hung up about the physical aspect, but the best training program, the best diet and all that stuff, it doesn't really matter if you cannot actually stick to it in the long run. So the short answer for your question would be do whatever is most sustainable. If you want to take it out of protein, that's fine. But for most people, it just makes it unnecessarily hard and expensive. So personal preference.
Okay. Is there a maximum amount of a certain micronutrient that you can take at one sitting that would not be absorbed by the body? For example, if I eat 80 grams of protein at one sitting, will my body take it all?
No, not really. They used to say you can only take 40 grams of protein in one sitting. The thing was, a lot of if you have 40 grams of protein for most people, that is going to be used for building muscle. If you get more protein than that, it's still going to be absorbed, but it will not work to build more muscle. It will be used to protect muscle in the longer run. That seems like a semantic thing, but it's actually very important because, like I said, the body's constantly breaking down the cells of the skin, the hair, the muscle, and rebuilding it. So you don't want, you want the net result to be positive when you're trying to build muscle or recover your muscles from workouts. So that means that if I'm going to break down this much muscle, I want to build up this much muscle. So from that 40 grams of protein, that 80 grams of protein, 40% is going to make sure this happens, and the other 40% is going to prevent the breakdown from becoming this big. So in the end, the amount of protein in a whole day is most important. Spreading it out over the day could be useful. That's another thing we'll go into next week. But in general, it's not going to be processed. However, what could be possible is if you take a lot of carbs at once. We're talking about really, really big amount of carbs. Your body's not going to process it straight away. So it's probably going to go straight into the fat storage. That doesn't really matter in the long run. It might matter for workouts. So if I eat lots of carbs in the morning, and a lot of it is going to be stored as fat, it may have been more useful to save some of the carbs for before the workout. But again, that's majoring in the minors. It's really worrying about the details. As long as you have a reasonable, normal diet, that is absolutely not an issue for the vast majority of people.
Okay. What are your thoughts about different body types and the effect of nutrition on each type?
Bullshit. So I assume that with different body types, you're talking about the mesomorph, the endomorph, and ectomorph. There are 3 different body types. The ectomorph is like the skinny one. It usually has relatively long legs and arms, thin face, and so on. The endomorph has short legs, short arms, small hands, and a round face. It's not because I'm fat. It's really just my body type. It's both. And then you have the mesomorph, which is people who are naturally wide-chested, wider shoulders, and so on. So for me, for example, I'm a combination of endomorph and mesomorph. I have the wide shoulders of a mesomorph. I also have the short arms and small hands of a endomorph. An ectomorph would be Jochen, owner from UnScared. He's partially ectomorph, relatively long legs compared to his whole body, but also some mesomorph because he also has somewhat wide-ish shoulders. So those are different builds. It comes from pseudoscience and psychology. They used to say that endomorphs were lazy and mesomorphs were more violent, and they had all these personality attributes. And at some point, someone ran with it. I don't know exactly where and when, but someone ran with it and said, oh, people with those different body types need different training. This is completely bullshit. There's absolutely no scientific basis for this, for training or for nutrition. However, for training, it could be useful to note that people with shorter legs are usually better at squatting for a variety of reasons. It has to do with biomechanics, which is might be useful for people who are competitive, so they know what they are naturally better at and what they can expect from the sport. But for nutrition, no, not in the sense of body type. Only if with body type you mean is someone fat or skinny, yes, then that is something you can take into account. But when it comes to those body types, like mesomorph and such, no, absolutely not. Cool.
Okay, any comments on eating the exact same meal for example, breakfast or lunch for weeks or even months? Does it change the way the body takes in the useful stuff, or does it get lazy in any way? Or maybe better, in what way is even the slightest variety in food intake better or a healthier option?
All right, we're going to go into this next week when we're talking about health, but for now, the question is basically, is it okay to eat the same thing all the time? Yes, it's okay. You can do whatever you want with your life, but no, it's not good for health because you keep getting a lot of the same nutrients. So you lack variety, which basically means you may have a lot of certain anti-nutrients and you may not have a lot of certain minerals and vitamins. Is this going to be an issue? The body is pretty resilient, so you probably live. But if you were talking about getting even close to optimal health, probably not a good idea. Next one.
If you would eat way less calories than you need for a long time, let's say a deficit of 800 for a year, will your body adapt to your calorie intake and lower your metabolism? And will it get easier, and will that easily get to your normal?
Will your body adapt to a low calorie intake? Yes. Imagine that right now you are eating 3,000 calories and you weigh 100 kilos. You start eating 2,000 calories, so you're 1,000 calories under what you normally burn. You start losing weight. That means everything you do in a day requires less energy. Because, you know, if you weigh 90 kilos, you have 10 kilos less to do on your pull-ups, 10 kilos less when you walk around, 10 kilos less when you walk up the stairs. So basically everything you do becomes easier, costs less energy. That's one. Two, your non-exercise physical activity goes down, especially if you're in a caloric deficit for a longer time, which is what you mentioned earlier. Your body automatically wants to move less. And three, there is something where your body temperature is slightly lowered. So you're gonna, there's a bigger risk of being a bit cold, and at some point you may even become a bit more susceptible to falling ill if you do it extremely and for a longer period of time. But that is also a small, how would you say it? There is another small lowering of the caloric deficit. So it's quite possible that over time that you, if you start with 2,000 calories and you burn 3,000, at some point you're only going to be burning 2,400. So your deficit has gone down from 1,000 to 400. 400. So yes, it lowers your metabolism. How long does it take? Well, it stays that way because it has no reason to go back up again. If you start gaining weight or you start moving more, yes, then of course your metabolism will go back up again. Cool, next one.
Is a calorie deficit, for example, to lose body fat, incompatible with high intensity workouts? Are injuries more likely to happen?
So when you're in a caloric deficit, your body has less energy than it expends. So you don't recover as well. You can certainly train with high intensity. I would actually recommend it because it helps you with maintaining the muscle mass and strength you have. Some people say, well, if you eat less, then you need to train less because otherwise you're going to hurt yourself and so on. Well, if you do that, or if you train super light, then all you're going to do is lose more muscle mass because you do not have the stimulus from training. You do not have the nutrition to actually recover properly. So of course you're going to lose muscle mass. However, what does happen because you recover less well, you can usually take less volume. So let's say normally you do, I don't know, 20 sets of push-ups in a week, for example. If you eat less, maybe now you can only do 14 sets per week. And if you keep doing 20 sets, you're not going to recover properly. You're going to get weaker or possibly get an overuse injury, although I've never seen someone hurt themselves from trying to lose weight. But I have seen people lose performance. So you may have to do less than what you normally do. But yeah, you can 100%, you can still train very high intensity in a caloric deficit. More.
When I want to lose weight, I reduce my calorie intake. Simple. But then I don't have energy for training and I need to eat to be able to train. I don't know how to get out of this cycle.
Is that question like personally going to you? I don't see the question here.
Yeah, it says me.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm very important.
Okay. That is something I cannot answer right here. That is something you really need to fix with your private coach. Because if you are constantly hungry, then you are probably not doing something right. It's okay to be a bit hungry when you're eating less, but that situation requires some well thought out coaching, because what you're explaining right now should never be the situation. Either you're under eating way too much, so you just crash dieting. Of course, you're not going to perform well. Or it's a mental thing. Maybe you eat less and you're telling yourself, oh, no, I'm weak and can't train. That might be a nocebo effect. So you're talking yourself down. That's also possible. It is possible that maybe you're just, you train so much and so hard that your body cannot sustain it. So then the training itself might be the issue. It could be the hunger that is simply distracting you. That can be something as simple as drinking water and eating some melon just to fill up the stomach and you'll be fine. It could be something. So it could be a lot of stuff in there.
Okay. Follow the next few seminars. But if you want to help with this, it's a really good idea to message your private coach. Yeah, and they can help you out with that a little bit more. Or send Jeremy a message. I'm sure he'd be happy to help. Look so happy. Any comments on fasting? Beneficial? Would BCAAs help prevent muscle loss during the fasting time?
Yes, possibly, no. So let me start with the last one. Do not use BCAAs when you are fasting. All right, we'll go into that later on when it comes to supplements, but don't do that. It's a very bad idea. It used to be the prevailing idea. It helps you prevent muscle decay. It does not. It may actually increase the chance that you lose muscle mass, although we're not super sure about it, but don't do it. Is fasting beneficial? Well, for health, we don't know, but we have no reason to assume that. A lot of the studies that say so come from animals, and a lot of studies that say that fasting is beneficial often do not compare it properly to regular caloric restriction. So what they will do in some studies is say, okay, we're going to have you fast, I don't know, so many hours per day or every other day. Oh, we suddenly see his health getting better. Okay, but what if he would just eat a little bit less every single day? Would he then not have the same effect? Spoiler, yes, it has the same effect. So up to now, even though there are some mechanisms that say that, well, you get different mechanisms in your body working when you start fasting, but a certain mechanism does not mean that you actually get a certain result. And that's what we see now. We've already seen studies that compared caloric restriction versus fasting, which is in a way also caloric restriction, just a specific way. And they both have the same results on the biomarkers. It's like the HbA1c, the amount of fatty acids in the blood, and so on. So can fasting be beneficial? Well, if it's practical for you, sure. For some people, it's because basically if you skip your breakfast, for example, you're already fasting to some extent, because you haven't eaten in 8 hours and then you're not eating until lunch. So you haven't eaten in 12 to 16 hours. Sure. There's not really any harm in that, as long as it is sustainable. If you are normally someone who eats breakfast and you suddenly stop eating breakfast, there's a big chance that you're going to overeat later in the day, right? That's not something you want. But if you're like, well, fasting feels comfortable, it's easy, it's practical, I feel good doing it, okay, sure. But for health and so on, or any magical fat loss stuff, no, right now there's no reason to assume that it does, even though a lot of people say it does. You can't really rely on animal studies that way, mostly because animals work differently than we do. Even some animals who do work like us a lot, like I said, mice get diabetes faster, rats get cancer faster, pigs get kidney issues faster. That's why we do the studies on them, so we don't have to use humans for 60 years before they develop cancer. We use rats, but that doesn't mean it works the same way with humans. For example, high protein intake for pigs can be damaging for their kidneys. For humans, not unless you already have kidney issues. Cool. More questions, because we're going to close off soon.
If you want any final questions.
So keep in mind, next Monday, we're talking mostly about health and performance and how that looks in practice. I'm going to give you guys some practical guidelines that you can apply. And in the third session, that's the 13th of April, we're going to talk more about the practical aspects. We're going to talk about how to learn more about nutrition after these webinars. We're going to talk a bit about obstacles in daily life, like what if you have late night cravings? What if you're super hungry every evening, late at night, and you start binging everything in the house? What if you are on the road a lot for your work and you have issues with sticking to your diet? We're going to talk a little bit about the different types of diets and why they work or do not work, and so on.
Okay, we have one final question. Eating at different times has an effect of weight loss or gain?
Eating at different times doesn't really have an effect on weight loss, although it may have an impact on whether you're losing muscle mass or fat mass. So if I would only eat everything in one meal per day, for example, there will be a lot of muscle loss throughout the day. The fat loss may be roughly the same, but there's a bigger risk of losing muscle. So in that sense, when it comes to muscle building or retaining, spreading the protein intake throughout the day might be beneficial. For weight gain, kind of the same thing. For fat mass, it doesn't really matter. Your fat just goes with like the main numbers. But for muscle mass, it can make a difference. And as a rough guideline, if you spread your protein intake over at least 3 or 4 meals throughout the day, so it could be like breakfast, lunch, dinner, late night snack, you're probably good already. Again, 3 to 4 is like already enough to fix that. You don't have to eat 8 or 9 meals per day like some bodybuilders do. Some suggest even that more than 7 meals a day is actually not beneficial. So usually what I tell people is eat 3 to 7 times per day, make it sustainable, make the general picture work, and you're probably good. All right, guys, I'm going to make time for one more question, and then I'm going to kick you guys all out.
We'll make it a race. Who's it going to be?
Again, guys, if you have relevant questions later on, There's going to be Q&As at the end of every webinar and so on. So don't worry about it if you cannot get your question answered. Last one.
Ooh, nice one. Thoughts on anabolic window?
So the anabolic window is basically the period of time after a training where you're most anabolic. And anabolic refers to building tissue. That means there's a specific time frame wherein you are more efficient at building muscle and recovering. And yes, it does exist. We used to say it was half an hour after a workout. And now it turns out that is actually several hours. But it is not like, here's an anabolic window where you need to eat, and then everything's gone. It is more like it builds up. So right after your workout, your body is not recovering yet. So you have some time afterwards, and you start building more muscle after workout, more, and it goes up to a bunch of hours, depending on how hard you work out and a lot of other factors. At some point, it drops back off. How long does the anabolic window last? Several hours. But basically, if you look at the whole anabolic window, like where you're actually building muscle, that can be anywhere between 6 and 72 hours, usually. If you're using doping drugs, it can be even longer. But for most of us, it is 6 to 72 hours, right? 6 hours to 72 hours, anywhere in between. So I would not worry too much about the anabolic window itself, assuming that you spread your food over the day. If you train in the morning without eating, then that means there is no food ready for you to help recovering. So then you want to eat as fast as possible after the workout. But if you've had a meal before the workout and you do your workout, it's only going to digest most of it afterwards. So you don't have to be like, oh no, I have to eat within 2 hours. No, there's already food in your stomach, so don't worry too much about it. So is there an anabolic window? Yes, it is longer than most people think. And if you had a meal before your workout, you probably don't have to worry about it that much. Keep in mind, guys, by the way, with all these questions, most of these questions, probably all, I answered them in the context of a healthy person with outside of competition. For competition, there may be some specific things that are different. And when it comes to if you have specific diseases like diabetes, some things are very different. Like I said, with ketosis, ketones, it's all fine for a healthy person. Diabetics can die from it. So keep that in mind. All right, guys, that was it for now. I've recorded everything. I think next Monday or maybe before that, Willem in the Daily Fitness Vitamins will put the recording so you can look back at it. Ask any questions next time if you want. Quick questions can always be fired at jeremy@unscaredcrossfit.com. If you want private coaching in nutrition and such, obviously simply make sure you hit up your private coach for some help with this. Thank you everyone for sticking around for so long, and I hope to see you guys next week and the week afterwards. Have an awesome evening.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Farewell.
Thank you. Bye.